Been a while since I did one of these. I have no idea if I made one of these types of videos before. But today, I thought I'd talk about how I create characters. Characters, creating them is probably something that comes very second nature to me. It's one of the easier parts of building this story. And you'll have to forgive me, my voice sounds any different than normal. I'm still going through this seasonal cough / cold. I get one every year. It's without fail, every winter I get a cold, man. It's just annoying as heck. But normally, the colds are pretty mild. But this one, I haven't had a cold this bad since 2017. Mostly it's just a bunch of mucus drainage, goes down your throat, cough a little bit, and then it's over. This time it's making my throat bad. Ugh. You know, like when you're swallowing something and it feels a little bit scratchy going down. It's just one of those things that bothers me. But I find that when I'm sitting up straight, I am a lot better. Which is funny because because they say you need to get your rest to help make this stuff go away, but when you lay down, you feel worse. So to bide my time until I have to go back down to lay down, let's talk about some lore of the Terraverse. How do I create characters? How do I make characters? Where did, say, Fang come from? How did I create Aleph? How did I create XXXX? Well, if you've watched plenty of my other videos, I talked about the backstory behind many of these characters in regards to the behind-the-scenes creation-wise. I've got a lengthy video about Fang in particular, and where he came from. But what about minor characters? What about secondary characters? What about villains and characters created just for this certain moment, or a side character who becomes a major character in the next arc, etc.? What about the characters such as Kiara? What about the characters such as Taewon? What about characters such as Delavere, etc., etc., etc.? Where do they come from? How did I make them? How is a character made? Well, characters are made to suit a purpose, naturally. For example, when you think of it in video game standards, when you walk into an inn, who would you be bound to expect sitting behind the counter? An innkeeper. So, you create the innkeeper. Well, what does the innkeeper look like? Well, what do you want it to look like? Is it a male or a female? If it's male, is he stocky? Is he skinny? Does he have a big bushy beard? Does he have a goatee? Does he have no beard at all? Does he have peach fuzz? How does his eyes look? Are his eyes slanted? Are his eyes normal? Is his hair brown? Is his hair blonde? And you just paint that picture mentally in your head until you've got the design you want for this character in terms of looks. And then you gotta give him a name. Well, how does this character look like? Does he have kind of slanted eyes? Does he look more Eastern? If so, you would give him maybe an Eastern type of sounding name, like Kyosuke. I just made that name up off the top of my head. Kyosuke, KiyousoukE. And so you just make up a name based on the looks of the character, based on the race of the character, based on where they come from. And that's the next step. After you've created your design for the character, you have to think to yourself, alright, where would this character fit in? Where would their regional birthplace be? Well, the slanted eyes kind of feel like that comes from the Kanesian area, which is north of the peninsula where the main trilogy takes place. So, I would probably give this innkeeper a Kanesian name. Gotta love that pause feature. this new updated program, whatever, has a pause feature. So that's awesome. Where I left off is, now that we have the design of the character and how they look like and their gender and all that stuff figured out, where do we go from there? We have to have a name. The name usually comes after we figure out where they might have been born. Now, ethnicity and region come into play when it comes to your birth name. For example, somebody who looks like a Canesian could have been born somewhere else and might have a Canesian parent and a non-Canesian parent, which means their name might be a little bit different from being a Canesian name. This is just natural stuff that we see in the real world. For example, you might hear French-sounding names in, say, France, but if a French family moves to America and 2 generations down the line, this French family might name their child an English name, such as George or something. Which is where we come from when naming this character in their region. So say this character, this innkeeper, is born in the Canesian city of Canese capital, the Canesian city, Canassus. Now that we know where he was born, we can figure out a name. This person's parents were both Canesian, so their name might be something like, say, Kyokos, or, say, Hanukkah. Things of that type of nature. Kind of Eastern sounding, but not exactly Eastern sounding. I don't want to have exactly a type of Japanese name. I don't want to have a type of exactly Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean type of name. I like to merge them around to find one that suits the area. Sometimes I just make it up completely, like Kiarel. Kiarel's name has no relation to any region of the world. It's just a name. You just figure out a sound. You sound it out in your head and say, alright, your name is Kiarel now. And while that might sound like an unmainstream name, that is actually the point. You want to have a name that stands out. But sometimes you also want a name that kind of fits your culture while also standing out. So say that there's nobody in Canesian City named Kyokos or Hanuko. So if you have that type of name, it stands out, but it uses the same syllables and types of sound connotations as a traditional Canesian name while also standing out. So now that we have his name, we'll call him Kyokos. Kyokos the innkeeper. He's moved south from Canesian City to the Shari Peninsula. Why? Well, now we see that that's the way I just explained it to you. We ask questions about this character. You're interviewing yourself, but you're interviewing the character as well. But you're the author. You are creating this character. So as you're interviewing the character, you yourself have to answer for them since they don't exactly exist. So you would ask Kyokos, why did he move south from Canassus? Well, let's say he moved south because of the politics in the region. Not exactly the type of politics he agreed with. Let's say the social hierarchy class system of Canesian City prevented his family from achieving the type of welfare that they believed they deserved. So they moved south to the Shari Peninsula, where life didn't exactly get too much better after the Empire took over the entire region almost overnight. But now they're stuck there. They can't go back north to Canassus. Because Canassus doesn't even want them anymore. See, that's how it works. You just keep going and going and going, answering the questions and molding and expanding, and before you know it, you have a full background on this character. Now, what's his personality? What's he like? Is he gruff? Is he timid? Is he stoic? Is he very taciturn? Using a bunch of these types of synonyms and things of that nature. You just keep building on those synonyms, and that's the easiest way you could do it. You use simple synonymous words. Taciturn, so he's taciturn, but he's also pretty stoic. But he could sometimes be timid in the face of adversity. Let's say he has a good heart on his shoulders. Let's say he's a bit generous when he needs to be. He might give you a free room if he feels like you really need a place to stay and he's got a room open. So he's not exactly the type of greedy type of person who wants to make a bunch of money. He just wants to make sure people are doing okay. So now we have a personality, basic personality, using synonyms. And going from those synonyms, we expand. Well, why is he taciturn? How is he taciturn? Well, in the way that he talks, his facial expressions very rarely does it change from his resting face. So his facial expressions is pretty bland. His voice is kind of monotone, but he might do kind things for you in secret. Like, say you're cold and you go up to your room and there's no blanket. Well, all while you're off to the outhouse going to the bathroom or something, let's say Kyokos takes a blanket up to your room and leaves it there and sneaks back out before you get back in there. You notice the blanket and you realize, hey, that guy's not so bad, even if he looks a bit gruff. And you just keep going and going and going from there. And that's how I make a lot of these characters. At first, they suit a purpose. The basic characters set up to suit a purpose for that point in time, but they don't just go away. They exist now in this world, so you have to do things with them after they suit your purpose. So if you ever returned to this inn, they'd still be there perhaps, or if you wanted to kill them off, if you don't want to use them anymore, that's also something you could do. But I try not to just forget the character and just leave them to mess off somewhere, unless we don't go to this region anymore. If they're a minor NPC like Kyokos and he's just the innkeeper, if we never return to this city, we probably will never meet him again. But that doesn't mean he just vanishes. Let's say 30 years later we return to this town, and maybe Kyokos has a child and their child's running the inn now. It's those minor details that you gotta keep track of. And knowing me, my memory is absolutely garbage, so I have to take a lot of notes on these things. And as you see in the back of the first 3 books that I have, you see the little appendix with all these little names, little brief descriptions. That's to help me as much as it is to help you, because I forget things in my own story. A lot of people do. One of the big examples of people forgetting their own story elements would be, say, Akira Toriyama on Dragon Ball. I'm one of the biggest Dragon Ball fans around. I don't exactly take hours and hours and hours of my day looking up obscure facts of Dragon Ball or anything like that, but I know he forgets things from time to time, but then he rolls with it. Let's say he forgets a story element, but he wants to make a new story element. He has to try to mold it and make it make sense. Only when a story element is forced in does it feel like it kind of doesn't work, but I don't want to get into that. I don't want to turn this into a Dragon Ball discussion video. I might make a couple of those in the future, though, in regards to how you create a story and what to do, maybe what not to do, etc. But for the purpose of this case, I've already explained how I created Kyokos, the innkeeper. He's a character that suits a purpose, but now he exists, and he has to continue to exist until he's either A, killed off, died of old age, or whatever. And if he's a minor character, you don't need to keep writing about him when you leave the area from which he lives. But if you ever return to there after an X amount of time, you have to go back to this character. You have to figure out, alright, it's been a couple years. What has this character been doing recently? Well, maybe his beard's a little bit more scruffier now. Maybe he's got a little bit of a belly, but he seems to be the same exact character. It's just those small little details, slight changes to the character's design. You don't really need to go into too much detail about, say, oh, he got into a bar fight last week, so he's got a black eye, or what he likes to do in his spare time. He's a minor character. You don't need to go into too much dynamics and things of that nature, but you have to make it at least look believable that the character ages and changes over time. They're not going to be wearing the exact same outfit every day of every month of every year. They're going to change clothes from time to time. If they're a traveler, they may only have one change of clothes, which is why they might wear the same change of clothes over a long period of time. But let's say if they don't wash, then the change of clothes gets progressively dirtier. It's these types of minor details that I get meticulous about sometimes, because I see it in other stories that a character wears the same outfit over a long period of time, and it just doesn't make too much sense to me why they would do that. You might look at their wardrobe and think, oh, they have 15 black shirts, 15 pairs of blue jeans. Oh, that's why they wear the same outfit every time. That's not exactly, well, if you look at my wardrobe, I've got 5 black shirts, 5 gray shirts, 5 white shirts, and about 5 pairs of blue jeans. So I often wear the same thing, in appearance-wise, but that's just because I have copies of the same. So it's possible that could happen, but you would also have some variety to the way the character dresses from time to time. But those minor details are just icing on the cake. You don't exactly need those for minor characters, but sometimes I do that. Sometimes I don't even talk about how they look at all. Descriptive writing is there to paint the picture, but my slogan for these videos is to be imaginative. I paint just enough of a picture so that you could picture it. You could imagine it. And it becomes your own imagination that creates the world, and you hear the characters talking. My dialogue is very strong. The characters talk to one another. You could hear their voices in your head. But then your imagination paints the picture. It paints the facial expression. It paints the way they move. It paints the way they sound. Not every character is going to sound the same in your head as in somebody else's head, for example. And not unless we actually make it into a movie or a video game and I have voice actors voicing this character, and then you'd actually have a voice to go with the character. But until then, if and when, if never, the subjectiveness of the picture is why I leave the canvas just empty enough for you to fill in those gaps. Imagination and creativity is the name of the game. If you get too descriptive with the painting, you could use your imagination to paint that exact picture that I wanted to paint, but then that'd be the same painting every time somebody reads this. And at least this way, you have at least the same idea and story and character dialogue, but your imagination can make this story your mental experience. That's why we don't go too much into detail on the NPCs and all these other things. We say, oh, he's got a bald head, he's got a scar on his face, he's got a gruff voice, he's a little bit bulky in appearance. But if the character's only there for a minor thug role or something, then we don't go into too much detail about him. We don't want to go into 15 pages of what this guy's life was like if Setchel's just gonna knock his lights out in that chapter and he's gone. For example, in the second novel with Setchel's bar fight. I don't exactly go into too much description on what all these characters look like, how they sound, where they're from, and all that stuff. They're just fishermen in a small little fishing village. And that's usually how a minor character is made for me. I just created to suit a purpose, but they exist. They exist in the world. They will continue to do the things that they do. Kind of like if you're, for example, if you're playing a Skyrim game. If you're playing Skyrim, you'll notice if you follow a character around, they will walk about and go about their daily schedule. That's kind of like what these NPCs do. They will walk about doing their little daily schedule when you're not around. They'll continue doing that. I want to give it a little bit of life, but I digress. We might go into how I make I've already gone into how I make major characters like Satchel and things of that nature in my previous other videos. But this is more about how I would make a minor character to suit a role, like Mr. Roiks in Delstan Village in the first book. Anyways, that's the end of this. I'm done. Be imaginative, everybody.